This is a great joy for me because in my 10 years I had as principal, there was no research, no bit of data that was any more important than that which came from the consortium. So this is a thrill, and it's a thrill to be here with my colleagues and share some of the innovative practices they've had. You have their bios in your folder, so I'm not going to go through and read each of those, but do want to introduce Kevin Gillick. He's the principal at George Washington High School down in Alphabet Land on the southeast side. Gregory Jones, the principal at Kenwood Academy, not too far from the consortium. And Brian Spittle, assistant vice president for enrollment management and marketing at Depaul. We're going to jump right in to the questions and to give most time for that. So first for Greg and Kevin. Could you highlight one or two innovative practices in your school that help students apply, enroll, and succeed in college?
At Kenwood, I think one practice that works well for us is three parts, actually. It starts with the senior conference that's largely led by the school counselors that capture all the performance data for students over time. So they meet one-to-one with each senior along with the parents. So this starts in early August. And it's transitions to a senior parent night in which the data that's shared by the consortium and also school data is provided to parents in collaboration with the school counseling team. And the third part is when we start to package the seniors, and in which they work closely with our post-secondary team, which consists primarily of two leaders, but also supported by senior leadership and also support staff. And that works really look at the match for students as it relates to their particular schools, but also the fit. And over time, we've noticed that Kenwood is that one, and through the support of the consortium, is that we know where Kenwood students have been successful. And so our experience with students is not only packaging them for particular institutions around the country, but also when we create our post-secondary college tour, which is largely about 40 schools a year, we ensure that we take visit schools where Kenwood students have been successful, one. But second, but equally important, is we look at the individual student. So if a student has a 2.4 grade point average and below in a 16 ACT score, and we've had a percentage of students successful at this type of school, we visit those schools and spend a lot of time on the campus where current Kenwood students are enrolled who had a similar background. One, it builds the confidence for students to look at someone who has a similar package and say, I can be successful like this student. But more importantly, there's quantitative data that's provided by the consortium that states that Kenwood students with this GPA, ACT score, socioeconomic background, has been successful at this particular institution. So that practice for us works, is positioning us to better serve our senior class.
Hi, so Washington High School, far southeast side, a little bit different than Kenwood, because Kenwood has probably a long tradition of working on these problems, and really Washington High School didn't. Where it's situated, we just weren't working on getting kids to college, decent work around getting kids to graduate. So I think we do a lot of really intentional student level things. Now we have an awesome post-secondary team that we've built over the last 3.5 years. But when I think about the work that we started, I almost think about a shock to the system. And that meant that like adults, local school council members, everyone kind of had to realize that there was actually a problem that we were a little bit behind the 8 ball on. Only 1 in 3 kids were graduating and going to college at Washington when I got hired there. And so that was a little bit scary. And it was also the work only of 5 counselors. And they were kind of hanging their heads because they knew about this but hadn't really dealt with it. So the intentional supports, I think initially shock to the system and trying to get the whole community thinking that college was actually something that our kids wanted and needed. So our post-secondary team leader, Tony Malcolm, was here, instituted a lot of like rituals, school-level rituals that would start getting people to think that college was possible. So the first year, it's a lot of supports, Alan, working at the senior level. Like really selling people on like college is something that we should be doing. Because believe it or not, there was some pushback at first. Could our kids do this? Was this for all of our kids or just our IB kids? But now we have very sophisticated supports that really started coming in the second year. We have a lot of financial resources put into it. Like Greg, we've got a post-secondary team that's comprised of teachers, counselors, post-secondary coaches, and all 3 administrators. We have a big part of our budget invested. I've got and external resources. So we have post-secondary coaches that do a lot of work, but we're not trying to just deliver these services beginning senior year. We're really trying to do that intentional support, especially junior year. And now in our 4th year, we're seeing it's getting like organically at the classroom level because teachers are so involved. You know, last week we had writing workshops on a professional development day. Well, one of the writing workshops that our teachers delivered for each other was how do we support kids to write the personal statement? So it's bleeding into the instructional culture actually at Washington. But, you know, we still got a long way to go. But a lot of the same things that Greg said, focus on data, determining where kids are in the process, and not leaving it up to chance. Tracking students along the way. And, you know, like right now, we're very eager to see how did last year's class do? Because we won't know until December, and we're excited to find out.
Everyone holds their breath for the clearinghouse data. I know. It's Brian, could you highlight some of the practices that help DePaul students complete their requirements and graduate?
Sure. Does this work? Or am I? Amazing. Yeah, but let me do a quick disclaimer first. I'm speaking on behalf of Depaul. I'm not even sure I can speak on behalf of Depaul, but I'm here. I didn't ask anyone. I just showed up. But there are a number of other higher ed institutions in the room, and I think there's really a lot of good work going on in higher ed in terms of trying to improve graduation rates. But here's the bad news. If you look back over 50 years of work in retention and graduation in American colleges and universities, you see not much improvement in overall graduation rates, right? Very little. In fact, the latest clearinghouse data tends to show that maybe it's getting worse. Maybe graduation rates have slipped a little bit in the last year or two. So that's. I mean, I think at the same time, of course, the population that's been involved in higher ed has changed completely. There's been a huge expansion, and you've got a vastly shifting social and economic climate. So I mean, you know, these institutions we don't operate in a vacuum. But I do think that it's really hard within a higher ed institution to shift these rates. We've been involved in this process at DePaul for many, many years now, and we have seen a change. If you go back 20 years at DePaul, our graduation rates were around 60% or a little less. Now they're over 70%. You won't find many institutions that have shifted like that over that period of time, and that's been an intentional process. Let me also say that and I'll refer this particularly to CPS students because we have a large number of CPS students at DePaul, and over half of them are from students outside of the selective enrollment schools. So that data that I just gave you also applies to CPS students. Our CPS graduation rate very much tracks the overall institution rate. There isn't a big gap. There is not a big gap. In fact, you can see that in the 2 to through research. So just a couple of things. I think part of what we've been involved with is an attempt to rethink some of what I would say are some of the dominant assumptions around retention that you find at the college level. I'll name one. That's the concept of persistence, that what we're trying to do is improve persistence from year to year. The data that we look at DePaul tends to show that persistence actually isn't the best predictor of long-term graduation rates. Just showing up, and that's not a small achievement to some extent, but just showing up from year to year may mask underlying issues around academic achievement or credit accumulation that are really the drivers of long-term graduation. So we've placed a focus on graduation rather than just improving retention from year to year, and that's part of, I think, why our rates have gone up, because when you do that, you start to ask different questions about what it is that you can do to intervene to improve students' chances of graduation, not just showing up the next year. I'll mention one program in particular, and that is our FIAS program, First Year Academic Success Program, which focuses particularly on math, not exclusively, but particularly. And one of the things that we've seen there is that historically we do have students that need extra help to get into mainstream math courses by the time they get to Depaul, as many institutions do. We have courses that a student can do to achieve that. But one of the things we've tried to do over the last few years is back up as much of that into the summer before a student enrolls at the university, offer those courses for free, so that a student actually really hits the ground running when they start in the fall. What's the idea there? I mean, there's an obvious sort of a benefit to that, I guess, but again, it's getting away from that notion of persistence and focusing more on progress to degree, because you've got to meet the sort of prerequisite and other kinds of requirements to get into key course trajectories. If you're going to stay on track at the college level, and we don't use that language, but we use very similar concepts, then that initial sort of getting into those key courses in the freshman year is very critical. You're going to see, well, I'll leave it at that for the moment. The other piece I'd like to mention is, and I think again it involves something of a rethinking, is looking at students at the very highest end of the achievement spectrum coming in from CPS and other schools that are under-resourced, low-income populations, first-generation populations. Very often, I think, colleges look at such students in limited terms, that the key goal is to limit attrition or to get them through to graduation. But some of these students are capable of the very highest levels of achievement. And one example I'll give at Depaul, and other institutions in the room have it as well, is a federal McNair program that works with low-income first-generation students and prepares them for doctoral study, not just graduate school, doctoral study, PhD. And we have now built a pathway from the freshman year, working with IB students coming in from Chicago neighborhood schools into that program, so that we're seeing figures of 70% of these students going on to doctoral programs. We've had our first student, who is a former IB student here in Chicago, just complete his doctorate. And I think this kind of thing, I mean, all right, the numbers we're talking about are relatively small, about 60 probably over 4 years. But I think that changes the face of what we mean by intersecting access with achievement. And this is something that I think many universities have yet to fully wrestle with. Some of these students can be our highest achieving students, and that's something I think that needs much more attention at the college level. But I think I'll leave it at that.
And those of us who have IB schools in our portfolio love to hear that, so that's good. We are here celebrating the 25 years of the consortium, so this is to any of you. How has the consortium's research kind of influenced your thinking or practices?
Well, at Kentwood, the research has showed us that we're not as good as we think we are. So it's one, and Penny and I talked about this earlier. The work around freshmen on track has pushed, which is a good thing, more students to the senior year, and which is our school model has been built for roughly 330 seniors projected to graduate, meaning that the supports that we provide, particularly in preparation for post-secondary enrollment, is for roughly 280 students. Now we're looking at 380 seniors, and we're just starting to adjust. And at Kentwood, we've noticed that our college enrollment rate has become flat. And the data revealed this summer, which was somewhat alarming, that students at Kentwood below a 2.5 grade point average, we weren't capturing. in large numbers for college enrollment. When they got around a 2.1, it was really a challenge. So 2 solutions. One solution is to improve the grade point average, which is, I think, is something is for us is more system-wide that we're working on. But also, you're always going to have pockets of students that's not performing at the level in which we would like. Probably early freshman, sophomore year where there's some challenges. So how are we supporting that population, which we, over time, we haven't been very successful. And lastly, the research has, and I mentioned this, for instance, 75% of Kenwood students that attend the University of Illinois actually graduate. Mm-hmm. That's super important, knowing that when we start to package students for colleges and sit with families, that we're informed where our students are successful. Now, there are other schools where they're not, and I don't think this is the platform to mention, to talk about those schools, but they're no longer part of our portfolio. So the research is amazing, and we share with our parents. Eliza knows that we're also always asking for things through Sarah and Marianne, and so it's very helpful for us.
Well, I actually think the work the consortium has done has had a huge impact. It's had a huge impact on my practice, and I work with a lot of principals like Greg, and I know what I think it's done is really helped focus our work. I was a teacher at Senn High School teaching freshmen a little bit over 10 years ago, and we had a really focused attention on students. We met in pods of teachers. We were worried about what was going on in their lives and stuff. You know what? But we weren't really tracking anything. I didn't even know until after I left Senn High School that the graduation rate was 50%. I didn't even know that. We just weren't looking at it. So what has the consortium's work done? It's helped focus the work on manageable chunks of work. But then, like Greg said, I think with this new to and through report, it starts messying it again. So it's focus it. I mean, the on-track work alone is so huge, right? For us to actually be able to talk to a family now. I can actually talk to a family in my school, and I can say, when you send your child here, we're going to keep an eye on your child. And I'm going to be able to know at 5 weeks, 10 weeks, 15 weeks, whether your child is progressing towards graduation. And guess what? We do the same thing their sophomore year. So we're not allowing things to go to chance. And so On Track really focused the work. And the potholes research, when Tony was launching our post-secondary team 3.5 years ago, really Tony didn't know what to do at first. And so he grounded the work, his work, first in thinking about leading a team in that potholes research, okay? And then when a group of people came to the table, and it was 12 people to begin working on developing the college-going culture, it was that potholes report that helped shape the vision and helped us realize what we should be working on. But I tell you, when we look at that to and through report this summer, I mean, it's not a shock. It's not a shock, but we are focused around getting kids to complete freshman year. We're really focused on getting kids to enroll in college. But exactly what's the connection between what we're doing in our classrooms and our school right now to get kids to graduate from college? I'm not sure if we really know. We're betting that our IB program is really important. We're betting that advanced academic programs are really important, but we don't really know. And we also don't know about the social supports that need to be provided to our kids after they graduate so they can continue to navigate the system. We had so many kids this year who went to city colleges on the STAR scholarship who would have gone to a 4-year college if they would have had the money. So they went there, and they're actually academically very, very capable kids. But if they don't get the right social supports from the city colleges and from our high school and from foundations, then are these kids going to move from a city college to a 4-year university? Are they going to be able to navigate that? I don't know. So still a lot of work to do.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. Of course, the consortium work is largely at the high school level, but there are a couple of things that the use of data and using institutional data are serious questions about your own practice and what you're doing on campus is absolutely critical. I remember very well looking at CPS data at Depaul when I think it was a consortium report that came out a few years ago, which indicated very nicely that Depaul had a very high graduation rate for CPS students. And I got a call from the Sun-Times, I think it was, asking me why that was the case. And I said I had absolutely no idea. And that was the headline in the next essay. But anyway, better forgotten, I think. But after that, we got together and thought, well, we really ought to know more about this. We really looked at CPS as an aggregate, the CPS aggregate. Well, really, CPS is sort of an interesting fiction from a college point of view. I mean, you've got selective schools, you've got magnet schools, you've got neighborhood schools, you've got charter schools, you've got all kinds of things. Unless you can sort of disaggregate that and look at those categories of schools separately, you're not going to understand much about your CPS population on campus. So we've been doing that for some time now, and I think it's been a huge benefit to us in understanding how to improve the experience for those students.
I have to ask, does everyone know what the STAR Scholarship is referenced? Okay. Yeah, no, there are a few nods, no. Any Chicago student who graduates with a 17 on the ACT and a 3.0 GPA has a associate's degree paid for at city colleges. And one of the things we often talk about in schools, and this gets to the match and all that good stuff, is the best college you can go to is the best college you can afford. And so there's always the navigating too of how do you find those best places, but also how do you afford them? And are there special things that you do there you think that really help students kind of weigh that? Gotcha.
For us, it's really trying to get more Kenwood students on college campuses around the country. And really quickly, I think for us is how do we develop more revenue streams through the local school, outside of the local school in our community to help get, instead of 75 students visiting schools, 200 or 300 students. And I would hope that the universities here in Chicago, but across the state, are able to work closely with your department around getting more of Chicago public school students an opportunity to go visit schools. And it shouldn't just be the sole responsibility of the local school.
I think at Washington, I know personally, I was very naive. I didn't realize how much of a barrier money was. I was, some stupid white boy from the suburbs. I thought every kid who is academically eligible is going to get into a college and the money's going to be there. And, it was like, wow, we really started, once we dug into this work, we started learning that actually that's not true. And we're having kids that get into Champaign-Urbana, but they can't go there because their family can't afford it. So I think one of the main things that we've worked on, other than, of course, exposure, but the exposure is just like increasing the demand, but obviously getting kids to apply to the right schools in a variety of schools because kids are finding out, oh, wow, Iowa's giving more money this year, or Nebraska's giving more money, but a lot of intentional supports for our students around scholarship acquisition. Now we're not just sending our kids downtown to apply for a scholarship, we are coaching them before they do it because otherwise we were just setting them up for success. And we have had massive growth in scholarships. And we had like 2.2 million 4 years ago. Last year, 10 million. I mean, this year it could be like 15 or $20 million. But the money is so critically important because our kids are capable.
I also think we got to a point where, and I don't think it happens as much anymore, where, colleges would say, oh, the high schools aren't preparing, and the high schools would say the elementary schools aren't preparing them, and the elementary schools would say, oh, those parents, they aren't doing anything. And, it just goes all the way down. So we have high schools and universities here on the stage together. Is there anything from the high school perspective you would want to say about to Brian, like this is what you could do to support, or from Brian, what the high schools could do to better prepare students?
I could leave at this point.
We only have a few minutes, too. Sorry. So,
Well, we already know that Depaul's doing an exceptional job with our students at Washington. There's a few schools in the city that are really successful with our kids, and so the fact that we can, like Greg was saying, help inform a family that some schools are doing a really good job. But I think we also need to somehow support universities to get really focused on the data just like we are and develop those support systems at the university level. And I know that's exactly what the federal government is supporting them to do.
I would suggest just additional support with the social emotional needs of young people. Pre-college enrollment, meaning that earlier you talked about the work that you guys do with students over the summer prior to the start of school. But knowing that Chicago students are entering schools across the state, but also across the country with a range of needs. And I just think oftentimes those needs are ignored, similar to they're ignored in the high school. So I would hope that we're supporting students once they exit our buildings and enter a college campus.
Anything from you, Brian?
I mean, just to respond to that, I think that's a critical piece. We have many hundreds of CPS students on campus through the year, and particularly in the summer. And we're quite intentional about trying to create pathways for some of those students into DePaul and into higher education generally. So I think that's a critical piece.
Well, it's this sort of conversation that I think will help move things along too. So we are grateful to our panelists. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.
So, for the past 25 years, the consortium has really made conducting research that's meaningful, actionable, and accessible a central part of our mission. And Elaine had described how building the capacity of adults to work together matters more than individual qualities of individual teachers or leaders in really improving schools, and how this capacity building is really essential if we hope to address the inequities that already exist in our city. So the consortium, over the past 25 years, has really sought to build the capacity. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, I'm not speaking in. I'm sorry. Okay, well, now I'm actually speaking into the mic. It's the problem with being my height. It's a little harder to actually reach the mic, and I can't tell if you can hear me or not. So the consortium has really sought to build the capacity of schools to problem solve and address the issues that they face, and identifying what matters for student success and school improvement, and creating indicators to chart their progress. We've really understood the critical role that measurement plays in providing data as a way of linking our research findings to schools so they can really understand the meaning of our research findings in a way that makes sense to them. And that's really what we're trying to do through this To and Through project. This has really been a way for us to formalize this idea of translating our research findings into ways that are really meaningful to schools so they can see what is happening to them, they're using data of it, so that they can actually start to address the problems in a way that really makes sense. So this is not an approach that the consortium is doing alone. We always have the importance of our partners, both within UEI through UChicago Impact and the communications group. This has also been a really exciting opportunity to formalize our relationship with the Network for College Success and all of their work in helping translate our research through data and really making it meaningful to schools as they are trying to problem solve with all the different issues that they're facing on a day-to-day basis. Oops, let me move through my slides. Okay. So this idea that building the capacity of schools through research can be more effective, it's been a part of the consortium from the very beginning. You've heard a lot today already about the 5 essential supports and the book that on organizing schools for improvement. So today, UChicago Impact is providing this data to, as Sarah mentioned, cities and states and students across the country. But this is something actually that the consortium has been doing since the early 90s. We've gotten a lot better at this, obviously, but this whole idea that it's really critical to find a way for our research to make sense to schools and really showing how our research findings play out has been with us from the very beginning. Again, you've heard a lot about Freshmen on Track today and in the body of work that talks about the importance of the transition to high school. What you might not know, though, is that the origins of On Track, actually, this is making John very happy here, actually came from an individual school report. We had practitioners come to us and saying that they wanted a way to understand the performance of students before high school graduation, and we knew about the importance of the transition to high school and the potential detrimental effects of failure, and so we developed the On Track indicator, and so we were able to help elementary schools look at the performance of their students as they entered high school, how they were doing in 9th grade, and if they ultimately graduated or dropped out. And this was also the first place where we actually saw that relationship between the 9th grade On Track indicator and high school graduation. So this goes way, way back. So, today, the To and Through project, and Elaine also talked about this, it builds off a large body of work that we have that was led by Melissa Roderick, looking at the transition from high school to college. And it really told us a lot about this interconnection between high school performance and college-going culture, and the importance of actually guiding students through the process of making college choices. And also about thinking about this interconnection between high school graduation, college enrollment, and college graduation. And so in December, a lot of you attended our event where we released the first piece of work from the To and Through project, where we showed the district trends about what's going on around educational attainment on different key milestones. And then Elaine also mentioned this, but by the end of the year, we will be making public the reports that Kevin and Greg mentioned about, the ones that they've kind of gave them a little bit of news that didn't necessarily make them as happy as they would like, but these will actually be public by the end of the school year, so people can really start to see also what's going on in schools across the city. Another big part of this project is the online tool. Okay, that is being produced by UChicago Impact. So up to now, a lot of the work that the consortium has done has really focused on school reports that were really meant for a school audience. With this online tool that is actually being released to high school principals the end of this week, will be made public early next year. And so this is really a way for the public to start understanding the patterns of what's going on within schools, really understanding some of the patterns that Greg talked about and about the performance of students within schools at different achievement levels across demographics. And it's also a way that allows people to compare across schools, because we see it's obvious that the role of schools is really central to this work, but all of us as a community across the city also play a huge role. We want to make sure that the data and the tools are available to everybody who is engaged in this piece of work.